Okay, Section 8 quickfire. Okay, market system, demand and supply. Remember the demand line shows the MPC. It has a rationing, signalling and incentive function. If there is a rationed off, the price goes up, maybe the supply curve will move to the left, therefore the price goes up, therefore less people can use it. That will be a sign that more firms should move into that industry. Signalling function, as the price goes up, more firms move into that industry. As the price goes up, more profits are made, therefore there's an incentive function. And what we want to do is we want to try and get to allocative efficiency. So it has an allocative function, allocates resources via the invisible hand, because the consumer is deciding what is produced. Okay, so we did that question on sand. Can the problem of sand be solved by market forces? Okay, the demand for sand goes up, therefore the price goes up. If the price goes up, then people will start to look for alternatives. In fact, are there more houses made out of mud in the world today than out of cement? Sand makes cement, obviously. Yeah, okay, I can't remember the figure. Market forces, do you remember the question? Market forces and inequality. And inequality will lead to rising inequality. This could be a good thing. Free market argument, trickle-down effect. Okay, market forces and wages. Should the government intervene? Wages will fall, more labour market flexibility. Once again, people have to take care of their own training. Or should the government intervene again? And market forces in the environment. Yes, the government should definitely intervene. So really these questions give the market forces argument. And then in each of those cases, the government should intervene, but maybe not in sand. You should be able to write a really good paragraph on market forces, which candidates never do. Okay, then we move on to the environment. Tragedy of the commons, tragedy of the horizon, not the environment. So I should say horizon then, mistake, e.g. sheep, public resource, we all follow our own self-interest, therefore you destroy that resource. The tragedy of the horizon is we take a short-term view, not a long-term view, particularly the financial sector. So we've got to work within the system, market forces, and then we also have the mega diagram about taking externalities into account. Oh, this is it on here. So negative production externalities, positive consumption externalities, you should all be able to draw this. So we tax this one, subsidise this one, and therefore resources will move into that particular area. Okay, you should be able to explain it on this one. The good is underpriced and overconsumed. We want the free market position is MPB equals MPC. Yep. And then we want to move the socially optimum position, which is MSC, is equal to MSB. Okay, we can also draw a positive production externality diagram, which is where the MSC is below the MPC. Same idea. In this case, the good is overpriced and underprovided. So we need to move to this part here. And then we can eventually move forward. And pollution permits, nice easy diagram. We can only pollute up to here, so we can have permits up to there. And then we can reduce a number of amounts of pollution, which reduces the amount of permits, which therefore raises their price. Okay, so public goods. Public goods are non-excludable, non-rival. But then we also have the free rider problem, non-excludable. We cannot exclude people from the benefits, e.g. defence. And if we use it, it doesn't stop the consumption of someone else. So these are the characteristics of public goods. So these are why it's provided by the government sector, e.g. lighthouse and defence. Nobody would disagree with that. It's also called a missing market. Partial market failure, you're talking about merit goods or demerit goods. You can draw the positive and negative externality diagrams, etc. Then we get onto the idea of 15-mark questions. Why perfect information could lead to market failure? Banks, asymmetric information, processed food, etc. Why monopoly power can lead to market failure? The daily welfare loss diagram, allocative efficiency, the point of allocative inefficiency. Talk about all of that. Price maker, inelastic demand. And also why the immobility of factors of production can lead to market failure. Remember, factors of production are land, labour, capital, enterprise. Enterprise will not move to a deprived area. Labour can't move because house prices are so high in certain parts of the country. No enterprise and capital will move to depressed areas, so the government needs to act upon it. Think labour, think labour market and housing. That's the big one. Okay? But you could get a question like that. Competition policy. Okay, competition policy, basically, fundamentally, the philosophy is that perfect competition is better than monopoly. We want to move to a market which is competitive, so we want to have contestability. Otherwise, there'll be a net loss of welfare, and consumer surplus is reduced because prices will be higher and producer surplus increase. Draw the diagram. Right. So if in a perfect competition or a competitive market, we produce here, therefore the consumer surplus is the whole of this area here. Okay. But if monopoly comes along, then the price is higher, so therefore there is less consumer surplus, and a lot of this consumer surplus is turned to producer surplus, and this then creates a welfare loss in here, and also the producer surplus is also reduced because output is lower. So therefore this creates a net welfare loss here. Okay, that's the logic behind it, which you can also explain that to the examiner, but of course you might get dynamic efficiency and economies of scale. We can draw both of those diagrams. Then we move on to nationalisation, privatisation and deregulation. We're on page 21 now of the booklet. So British Telecom, British Airways, big success from deregulation. The banks, 2008-2009, major failure. Deregulation did not work. Rail and water did not work because they were like little localised monopolies, and it's also a natural monopoly, diagram down there. So really it's a good argument that the government should be running that sector, as it is in most countries in the world, apart from, is it Peru, Chile and the UK? One of those two. We all know the problems with the water industry. This is that diagram. And rail, positive externality, natural monopoly, which is that. Okay, so if you have privatisation, you must deregulate the market as well. Sometimes it works. Banks, the deregulation went too far. Rail and water, it did not work. Partly because they're little localised monopolies. Okay, then we move on to deregulation, more competition. Think benefits of competition on here. Less rules, but we will still have creative destruction, dynamic efficiency, innovation if there is deregulation. Think contestability, nationalised industry, privatisation, and with deregulation. Note that perfect competition is always better than monopoly. Problems of deregulation, financial crash, obviously with the banks, and also with water, sewage, lack of reservoirs, chicken farms putting their chickens into the water, all that stuff. Okay, so this is page 25 now. This is talking about Lord Turner. So he looked into the banking crisis and he said there were severe deficiencies in UK and global banking regulation. So in 2011, if you look at RBS, was not focused on liquidity, capital and asset quality. You've done all this in money and banking, in the macro part of the course. And in 2009, they recorded the biggest ever corporate loss of £25 billion. So Fred Goodwin, though, went for growth. Remember, our objectives of firms, walked away with a pension worth £700,000 a year and £15 million in compensation for doing such a fantastic job. In 2004, he was knighted, and he also ran the Princess Trust. Okay. He had also a massive office worth 350 billion quid, not just his office, a whole building, but he had the top floor and he had his office was actually 20 metres in length. Okay, think objectives of the firm. So in his case, it was his own ego. He wanted to create the biggest bank in the world, even though he wasn't actually a qualified banker. He was a chartered accountant. Okay, so we have regulation on here. We have the Financial Policy Committee. Right, I know this is sort of macro, but this also regulation looks at the whole macro system. Prudential Regulation Authority looks at the micro system, individual banks. The Financial Conduct Authority, which is also independent of the Bank of England, they also look to check that banks aren't mis-selling policies. However, there's too much regulation that also creates a problem. So with privatisation, we definitely needed regulatory authorities because you had very big firms. Regulatory capture is a form of government failure. Okay, what is regulatory capture? So in essence, regulators may become friendly with the firm that they're meant to be looking at. There's often asymmetric information, is that the big firm, the water industry, may not give the full figures to the regulator, and the supposedly inefficiency of the public sector, because they're not driven by profit, therefore they will not be as efficient. The evaluation is, will regulators really be inefficient? What is the alternative? You really have to have regulators. Right, we can probably criticise Ofwat. That would be an example of government failure because they haven't done a particularly good job in terms of sewage and lack of reservoirs. Okay, we also come to this model here, which is sort of section 5, but also section 8, structure, conduct and performance. So the structure of the industry will also determine the performance of it. Okay, so water, which is a monopoly, it acts like a monopoly. There's a lack of dynamic efficiency, not good, regulatory capture, rising water bills, sewage in the sea, etc., etc. Cars seems to be a pretty competitive market, lots of research and development, really good cars, although they even broke the regulations in terms of emissions. There are high barriers to entry, but Tesla moved into the market. China has moved into the car market, and Kia has also done a pretty good job of moving in from South Korea. Okay, so there's lots of recent development. There is entry into the market, so you tend to get good cars, but we still need some regulation. Otherwise, there'll be more and more air pollution. Perfect competition, monopolistic. Do we really need regulation? Because there's lots of competition, free entry and exit, which allows us to get to the bottom of the ATC curve in perfect competition. Maybe less so, but there may be negative externalities involved. Okay, so contestability is key. Contestability means more and more competition. Competition Markets Authority, what's their job? Monopoly busting, merger policy, and looking at restrictive practices as well. That means full-line forcing, where you force supermarkets to sell all of your products. Otherwise, you will not supply them with any products. Okay, so merger policy, checking that two firms joined together don't become too powerful. They are needed. Think about banks. Easier to switch accounts. Perfect competition, monopolistic. Maybe competition authority is not really needed, but you still need externalities. Oligopolies, monopolies need regulation because they may collude. They may have negative, positive externalities. They may be price makers. Well, there will be price makers, but they may charge really high prices and abuse the consumer. Okay, government intervention again. So these are the forms of government intervention: indirect taxation, subsidy, price controls, maximum price, minimum price, state provision. Okay, taxes, you already know that. You draw that with the negative consumption externality diagram. One of the problems is they could be inelastic, so therefore it may not change the demand very much. They're also regressive, which maybe means they hit the poorer consumer to a greater extent. Or we can have a subsidy, which we have a positive consumption externality diagram. Problem with the subsidy leads to more national debt. How large should the subsidy be? We have price controls, maximum prices. We did a question on this with energy. Stops the function of the free market, stops investment, but also minimum prices. I'm going to talk about this one a bit later on. The Common Agricultural Policy. Therefore, there's a massive excess supply of products. Therefore, we need buffer stocks. Large farmers gain the most because they sell the most amount of goods. So therefore, they put more fertiliser on the land. More fertiliser destroys the land. So the Common Agricultural Policy was a very good example of government failure. Okay, or the government provides state provision, e.g. education, National Health Service, because they have large positive externalities, but you want to get to the point of a marginal social cost equals to marginal benefit, which is a socially optimal position, or with missing markets on here, so therefore we need public goods, so therefore it's provided by the state. They provided free at the point of delivery. That is state provision. Right. There is excess demand, so there's a bit of rationing on there. Okay. Next question up here. Number 13. Regulation again. E.g. by the year 2040, all cars made in the UK must be electric. It was originally 2030, but that was pushed back by 10 years. Air pollution, for example, may make UK firms uncompetitive. So we can have air pollution regulation, but then that may make us uncompetitive. May make us more competitive actually, but may make us uncompetitive. China has a lot of air pollution. So there's a famous quote where the Chinese premier said, "Even I suffer from poor air." So, okay, so China started to do something about it. Smoking in enclosed places, that's also regulation which is banned, obviously. A quick way of solving a problem, e.g. air pollution. If you really want to solve it, you pass a law which will stop the air pollution, therefore firms have to abide by that law. And the reason why we have this is because of the tragedy of the commons. This is particular to the environment, obviously. Extension of property rights, I think you all understand this right now. Who owns the river, that's also a problem. And who owns the air, which is a global public good. Move on to pollution permits, done the diagram. If you want to reduce the amount of pollution, then S-curve moves inwards, and that means the price of permits go up. Cool diagram, negative production externality diagram. We put the supply line, the permit line where MS is equal to MSB, and we get to the same point that we do with taxes. Okay, but once again, this is creating a market for permits. So tax and subsidies is market forces, pollution permits is also market forces, command and control is regulation. But also, we need to regulate in terms of pollution. So pollution permits is a sort of little bit of regulation in there as well. But first and foremost, it is a law. Number 15, government failure. Okay, so we have the market system, the price mechanism. Remember the first slide that I did. The best way to solve inequalities is through market forces. I think you all know that argument. Give the enterprise argument, trickle-down effect, increased investment, increase in AS, increased underlying trend rate of growth. Wages should be left to market forces. They would then go down, which makes it easier for businesses, although people will be poorer. Should the government intervene? Yes, they should do in this case. The problem of sand should be left to market forces. Should the government, if at all, intervene in the environmental problem? Discuss. Well, of course they should, because of the tragedy of the commons, the tragedy of the horizon, and present bias. Definition of government failure is also, so just because the government intervenes, that could also lead to misallocation of resources. Government intervention could make matters worse and therefore may not improve economic welfare. E.g., I've written an essay on this on page 36 and 37 of the booklet that I'm just going to give you on Thursday. Then we have the Common Agricultural Policy, excess supply, buffer stocks on here. This is a classic example of the law of unintended consequences. The farmers put loads of fertiliser on the land, destroyed the land, but they increased output, so therefore they got more money. The biggest farmers earn the most, so did the fertiliser industries, so they all loved it. But we had too much food anyway, massive buffer stocks. Then we put those massive buffer stocks on the world market, which depressed the prices for everyone else in the world, so upset their market forces argument. Okay, we're coming towards the end now. Pages 36 and 7, I then wrote an essay on it. Okay, government intervention, success or failure. Right, we always tend to focus on the failure. Minimum prices, common agricultural sector, big failure. The water privatisation fiasco with the regulator, perhaps there's regulatory capture, localised monopolies, failure. Didn't work. HS2, £100 billion spent to save 8 minutes, and then all the excess land was bought up by venture capitalists and by hedge funds. Increase in national debt, saved 8 minutes working time. Paragraph 3, collusion. There have been some successes. Offshore wind, big success. The government guarantees how much money they will get, and also we should actually probably have an increase in onshore wind farms. But then the government didn't do that, which is the world's cheapest form of energy, unless you live in Saudi Arabia where it's $10 a barrel. Professor Mariana Mazzucato, obviously my heroine, she's a big idea on industrial policy. The government knows, we all know what the big issues are. Have a green revolution, so we should back that. That would be an example of a government success story. Okay, end of. Thank you.